Former undercover cops of Reddit, what is the craziest thing you had to do to not blow your cover? My cousin was an undercover ATF agent. Anyway, they were trying to bust some guys for illegal alcohol distribution and were building a rapport by going undercover. My cousin doesn't take his ATF badge with him when he's undercover because if anyone ever saw it, he could get shot. Anyway, some hot-headed black and white cops came over and started harassing them. My cousin couldn't blow his cover. But pretty soon the police started getting physical and they beat crap out of my cousin and the guys he is trying to get evidence from. They take them all into the police station only to find out that my cousin is ATF. My cousin was pissed because cops aren't supposed to beat people up. He is currently filing a lawsuit against that police department. My friend who was an undercover cop said that multiple times he had to let himself be arrested to not blow his cover. Like when a sting was going down or whatever, instead of being like, hey, I'm a cop, he would get arrested along with everyone else. My friend used to be a state trooper. She told me about how she used to have to go undercover as a hooker to try to catch Johns. She didn't do so well, though. She was far too polite. So they all knew something was up. As a former correctional officer, we had a situation where a major police department planted a cop in the prison to get information on a guy they believed was orchestrating hits from inside the prison. The warden knew and I knew, by accident, but not a single other CO knew. Nor did any of the staff, including medical. And that's the way they wanted it. He went through receiving. He was categorized and placed. It was wild. He was there for a week. Got the info they needed and got him out. It didn't become public knowledge that he was undercover until after I had left, and it was a long while after as they were making a case. That was a surreal moment. My father worked for NSYS. He told me about an incident where his guys set up a sting to bust some drug suppliers who turned out to be local police setting up their own sting. They figured it out when they tried to bust each other. Edit. Grammar. I know a guy who often went undercover as a junkie. He was committed. He'd stop showering for a while before a gig and piss on his tracksuit before going into work. He was so good that he managed to get the same dealer convicted twice in the space of a year and they never suspected he was the rat. He had multiple police records under different names too. Not a former undercover cop, but I have a second-hand story about an undercover cop. So, this guy appears out of nowhere and befriends a relative of mine who was involved in illegal stuff. Dude was very friendly and just down to party. Had money. Paid for. Product. Everything. Were dropping on parties and even allegedly hooked up with hoes. Then he placed an order much larger than before. Few weeks later, relative of mine is arrested and is currently in prison. Craziest thing an undercover cop had to do to keep their cover? Buy Drew Gus and Duckitches. Not a cop but a guy my mom dated for a long time was. Older guy. In his 70s now. He was fresh out of the academy and at the Asbury Park riots. Sad scary sheet. And then was an undercover narcotics cop for 14 years during the 70s and 80s with the NJSP. He was Puerto Rican. And spoke Spanish. Was an ex-Marine. And became a state trooper. They utilized his ability to blend in with organized crime and the Latin community. He had to do coke in front of a bunch of dudes during a buy one night. And basically stuck his knife in and blew a mound up his nose. Then he started having a minor paranoia panic attack that they were going to find out he was a cop. Thanks to the gram of blow he just took to the dome. He was breathing heavy and went out for air. His heart was pounding out of his chest. Panicking over how to get out of it. One of the gangsters came outside to talk to him. He's ready to run or fight. Guy goes, man, I've never seen someone snort that much at once, man. You okay? He sighs a huge sigh of relief. And was like, yeah, I never did that much. I'm having trouble breathing, haha. The guy was really nice. Brings him a drink and they smoked a cig. Everyone is joking that he has the heart of a lion to take that much. He actually felt bad about locking that one guy up when it all went down. Think he said he tried to help him or get a reduced sentence or something. There are other stories. I'm former law enforcement. I did a few deployments in a surveillance capacity to sit near targets in restaurants and bars to overhear conversations. Sorry to disappoint, but I didn't do anything particularly crazy. Criminals just tend to talk about the same shit that everyone else talks about, women and sports. Publicly they tend not to talk too much about their criminal activities, but you can still glean information from places they say they went to and people they say they know. My dad did undercover for several years and talked about a meth head that he hung out with all the time and even babysat her kids when she went out to get high. This went on for several months while they were figuring out who the big dealer was and acquiring warrants. He grew a beard, had a fake ID, drove an old shitty car. Eventually they got warrants to bust a bunch of people in the drug ring, and he actually was part of the SWAT team at the time and was part of a group that smashed in doors and arrested her and a bunch of others in the area. He had to wear a balaclava to protect his identity when with the SWAT team. He said it was actually really difficult because he had become an important part of those kids' lives and was kind of attached to them, and now they had no mother and had to be taken to Child Protective Services. I never got to ask him more questions about this before he passed, but I have no idea how he balanced this crazy second life and then came home and acted like a normal husband and father in our family. My cousin, who's in secret services, acted like a drug addict, homeless beggar and semi-crazy Muslim religious salesman owning stall for surveillance purposes. My cousin worked undercover in the biker community. He was really into working out and bodybuilding, so he managed to convince everybody that he treated his body like a temple and didn't drink, do drugs, or eat like shit. That wasn't very far from the truth, so it wasn't hard for him to play that part. He is also a former Marine sharpshooter, so he is tough as nails and pretty heavily tattooed, so he definitely gave off a don't duck with me vibe. City cop here. We don't do too much long-term undercover, but our general orders have a policy covering use of drugs on duty in certain circumstances. While it doesn't specify that we can do drugs, it states that if we consume them we have to immediately respond to our department's health clinic for documentation and treatment. The use of the word immediately made me imagine the undercover cop taking a puff of a joint and standing up straight away, speed-dealing the department and walking out reporting the incident. They at the least do drugs. Easiest way to prove you're not a cop is to take some illegal substances. Then they just make sure the court date is far enough away that the officer has clean pass if he's accused of doing so. Actually, I'm pretty sure undercover cops get some sort of waiver for minor crimes when in an operation. Obviously they can't shoot someone, but I think they could get a pass if they need to borrow a car or use drugs. Edit, may be wrong. Was thinking in terms of fitting in. Not free license to play GTA eye roll. I must have been 15 when one day the doorbell rang and I opened the door to two guys looking very much like real tough street guys. They showed me their badges and asked for my mum or dad. Turned out that they wanted to stake out a public playground behind our garden that was used by some drug dealers for their mules. People drinking large amounts of water and puking up little packages with some substance in it. There was a multi-story bank near the playground, but the bank didn't want anything to do with it. So they asked my parents whether they could set up a surveillance team on our terrace for a couple of days. My parents allowed it. And my mum prepared food for the guys all week long. Not a cop. But in college I took a few criminal justice classes. Our professor, who I will call Bob, was a cop for 15 or so years and had gone undercover in the 80s for a very long time. Bob was biker as a hobby and he was sent undercover to break up a meth ring in the biker community. Bob arranged to buy some meth from some guy. And shortly after the dealer was arrested. The dealer's sister started telling everyone she thought Bob was a cop. And some of the other bikers started asking him questions. So day or so after the sister started accusing Bob of being a narc, the entire group was at a bar. Bob told a few of the guys to meet him outside in a few minutes. And Bob told the sister he had some meth for her and to come outside. When they finally got out there, Bob told her, "Where I'm from, friends don't call friends knocks." He then beat the shit out of her in front of the entire group. He kicked her as hard as he could between her legs. Which, while not as painful if you're a woman, still hurts. Then he said he punched her 4 or 5 times in the face. Hard. He said he didn't wanna do it. But after he did that, no one ever accused him of being a cop again. I worked as a transcriptionist for a while. And I transcribed some tape taken off of body mics of undercover officers working a very notorious domestic terrorism case. It was crazy. They would sound like an absolute backwoods hill people lunatic while talking to their marks. Then later, when talking to the other police officers, would sound all business and like a very professional person. As someone who is literally on Reddit avoiding my transcription duties, this sounds a lot more interesting than what I'm currently writing up. I once was the gardener for a cop who worked undercover in the 6th trade to identify pimps, traffickers and extract underage kids. She retired early due to mental health issues likely stemming from drug use during her time undercover. To keep cover, she would do the drugs that were being offered used. Of course, things spiraled out of control for her and suddenly she's on permanent paid leave and she stays in the house most days hiding from the world. So for her, what she did to keep cover is offer up her sanity in exchange for some successful arrests. So I read this as underwater cops for some reason. And I thought that there was a whole world of policing that I was missing out on. Feels bad, man. Used to be night manager of a 6 shop. A red-faced vice cop and his lady came in late at night. And the vice cop proceeded to brag about how he had been part of the team that helped recently shut down a local strip club. Every Friday, the chief would hand him and his partner each $1,000 cash and send them to the strip club with instructions to do whatever they could to try and buy pussy and drugs. Apparently their first few trips were a dud. But after a while, the one in my store was able to cajole one of the girls into giving him a BJ. He came in her mouth, then flashed the badge before she could even swallow. He then proceeded to demand to use our bathroom. I told him no dice. Public restrooms plus adult retail is a bad combination for everyone. He said he was a cop. I told him that was completely irrelevant. He protested by pissing his pants in my store and telling me that I made him do it before storming out with his lady. TLDR, if you live in Butler County, Ohio, 2,000 of your tax dollars are spent weekly on table dances and BJS for idiotic methodic king broshire paths who aren't even housebroken. Way to serve and protect. Dickhead. I have a relative that was undercover narcotics. Before he started, we had a family meeting explaining that if we saw him out and about, we were not to approach him and not to say anything to him and a few other do's and don'ts. He will come to you if he's not undercover at the moment. I know a guy, retired police officer, who works as an investigator of crooked doctors. He dresses up in disguises and is given a fake name to use. He goes into doctors' offices and tries to find out if a doctor who is suspected of overprescribing narcotics is legit or not. He told me a story about a time he went in to see a dentist about a minor toothache and walked out there with a prescription for Percocet and I ordered. He says there are plenty of legit doctors out there. But there are also a lot of careless ones who give in to their drug-seeking patients. It wasn't me. But my grandfather. Guy worked narcotics. Had to get in with some guys who dealt meth and was pretending to be a user himself. I believe he actually had to shoot up once or twice. One day one of the higher-ups was starting to get suspicious. Didn't believe my grandpa was actually a user or anything because he didn't have any marks on his arm, where they normally do, and my grandpa told them that he doesn't shot there, but near his pelvis. Said he was more than happy to pull down his pants and undies to show him. Dude didn't want to see any big dig and my grandpa got away with it. He lives in a whole other state now for safety reasons because a lot of the guys he put away years ago are now getting out. My father's friend is an undercover officer who spent the last 2 months in the hospital. He was put in a coma when his target found out that he was a cop. They beat him to death. So they thought. It took the police over an hour to get to him. He had a brain bleed and multiple fractures. The risk those guys take by going undercover is remarkable. When he was in a coma, I was sure he was going to die. He made an amazing recovery and is now finishing recovery at home. Answering for my husband because he only lurks. Also, This was from a simpler time before the internet. My husband and his brother worked for neighboring departments. Husband was undercover narcotics and his brother was a beat cop. One night my husband was buying some crack from a group of dudes. One of the friends of the seller recognized my husband. Probably from court or something. The seller's friend started saying this guy is a ducking cop. I know he's a cop. I've seen him before. You have to tell us if you're a cop. First of all, that's not true. Second of all, my husband is a big dick. My husband replies, no, I'm not a ducking cop. My piece of shit brother is. How do you know my brother? Why do you know cops in neighboring city? Seller. Your boy is a ducking narc. I'm not about to buy from a ducking narc. Seller and his other friends beat the shit out of the guy who recognized my husband. Husband left the location unscathed. But's on crack. I used to work third shift at the front desk of a cheap hotel while I was in college. We had a shady couple check in and stay for about 2 weeks. Every night at all hours we received calls for that room and we knew something was going on. One night I walk in for work and my manager and the cops are waiting for me in the lobby. They informed me that room 204 had been busted dealing drew Gus out of the room. They told me the cops were going to hang out all night in the room and when I received calls for that room I was to send it on to them as if everything was normal. All night I received calls. Forwarded them on. And I could see 10 minutes later a car would drive past my lobby headed to that room. The cars would pull in. The cops would pull out. Probably happened 7-8 times all night. Kind of fun being a small part of a bust like that. Not me, but a close family friend worked for 3 years as an undercover homeless narcotics officer in a beach city here in southern CA. He was born and raised in this city so he fit in perfectly. He didn't cut his hair or beard and wore a colorful poncho sweater every day with 2 rotating days off for almost 1,100 days. He was so good at it he refused several promotions and became known as harbor cop around the department and family. Not an undercover cop, but a friend of mine was. Here's the story. Back in college I was classmates with a lady who needed lots of help to get her footing after not being in school for a while. Cause of all my help, I quickly became like part of her family. And was always being invited to her family get-togethers. Her husband was cool. We talked sports. Played pool. Stuff like that. But anytime I or any of my friends would ask what he did for a living, he'd get cagey about it. So we'd drop it. The way I found out he was undercover was because I almost blew his cover in public. At the time, I worked in a mall. On my way to work one day, I see him with a group of dudes that looked sketchy. So I roll up on him and I'm like, hey man, what's up? What you up to, bro? Dude looks at me like he'd just seen a ghost and quickly proceeds to berate me and act like he doesn't know who the duck I was. All the while though, he's making these eyes like get the duck out of here. And I'm completely oblivious. Eventually the dudes he was with come up out of a store and quickly assume I'm a problem. And start threatening me. He played it off like I was some punk who was being put in his place. And that he handled it. Everything was cool until one of the cats he was with suggested they do something to me. For a split second. Not my undercover buddy. Not me. And I'm guessing the rest of them dudes knew if he was being serious. Then spontaneously he said, just ducking with you kid. Get the duck out of here. I ran like crazy to the first exit I could find. Weeks later I ran into my friend's husband in a more calm environment. And asked what the hell had happened. He proceeded to explain to me that I had bumped into him while on duty. And that the guys he was with were from a gang of traffickers he was casing. I almost blew his cover by asking about his family. A family he wasn't supposed to have according to the gang he was casing. He tells me I was lucky cause the guy who threatened to kill me was high as duck and that's probably the only reason he didn't follow through. Long story short, a few days later they raided the whole group and brought it all down. He quickly asked for a division transfer. Cause of what happened with us at the mall. Okay, the typical I'm not a cop but I worked forensic psych for over 15 years. Not long after I got started there was a story in the newspaper about a young cop who had just graduated from the academy. He was young but looked very young. Like 16-17. So the powers that be decided to put him in schools to combat the growing drug problem, and he was playing a high school student interested in buying dealing. Apparently all went well for a while. But then he started using coke. This was in the very early 80s. His habit got so bad it was noticed by his superiors and he was arrested. So they sent him to us to see WTF went wrong and if he was responsible for being addicted to coke. He looked so young and scared that I felt sorry for him. Not only was his career ruined, he was charged legally with drug charges and now he was in a psych hospital. All this to say, when he got to our hospital, he had a hole in his nose, in the septum, from snorting so much coke. He eventually was convicted and I forgot how much time he was given. I was a bartender as FL for a summer when I was in my mid-20s and was often left to man the bar and lobby by myself on weekends. It was a bit nerve-wracking as a woman, but it was a lot of fun helping tourists and such until one day, this guy shows up at my bar and instantly moves to sit at the far corner with his back to the wall so he can watch the door. Instant red flags about him being a cop, but in street clothes. Not a problem. Ask him what he wants to drink. He nurses a couple glasses of water while he people watches and eventually calls it a night. He kept showing up every few days and when things were slower, I'd strike up a few conversations with him or get him involved with a few of the others at my bar so everyone would have a good time. He kept the same story that he was a local undertaker and I kept up the story that he was drinking some vodka on the rocks. A month went by when another lone weekend shift comes. My boss left me with a wooden bat with a weight on the end named just in case and left me alone. I jokingly told my not cop regular about it when he showed up. Naturally, this was the weekend a local dealer showed up with a girl on his arm. He was already off his rocker when he sat down at my bar and, after a couple of shots, started picking fights with my customers. After my attempts to interject myself to calm the guy down, my usual gets up and walks over to ask the man to leave. The dealer pushes the cop and starts making fun of his outfit and height. I ask the dealer to leave. Cop reinforces what I said and the dealer challenged the cop to a fight outside my establishment. The door hadn't closed before the cop had this dude on the ground and in cuffs. As for the girl, she vanished out the back door while everything went down. I thought that would be the end of everything since my usual stopped showing up. But he caught wind of my last weekend working in town before leaving so he came to see me. When it was a bit quiet and I wasn't busy, he flagged me over and handed me a little slip of paper with his badge number. He told me that he was undercover to bust that guy and wouldn't have been able to talk to so many people for information without my help. I told him to get a better story and to stop acting like a cop so much because I had him pegged from day one. We both laughed and I finally got him to have a beer with me later that week when neither of us were working. I was a UC. I regularly worked ruses because I don't look like what I did. And I was really good at it. I'm not in law enforcement anymore, BC of medical. The craziest thing I did was to let the suspect get close enough to me to think he could influence me. He thought I was a dumb 20-something looking for a job. To be fair, he wasn't a bad looking guy. But with what this guy did, it's a hard no. Selling him on being innocent and naive, I got layouts of his offices, compute accounts for evidence and seizure, and identified co-conspirators in the scheme. The indictment was under seal so my identity was never revealed. Unfortunately for you guys, it's not more glitz or glamour. It was a financial fraud case. I used to be undercover. I did time. I had to deal Drew Gus. I had to heal. I was so good at it. It got me a promotion. My mom's best friend's husband was a spy. No one ever knew much about what he did when he was undercover until one day the wife got a call from this man and he told her that his wife and her husband had an affair beyond what they had to do while undercover. All of this crap came spewing out, but the one that stuck with me is that he had to sit there and watch while a 13-year-old girl get gang raped by a bunch of guys. Dude is super ducked up and on lots of meds. Not my story, but one of my dad's best friends was a Hong Kong detective back in the 70s and 80s when it was under British rule still. When the Mormon missionaries first started coming in and going through the more crime-filled areas, the local mafias didn't think twice about doing anything illegal in front of them in broad daylight. When Ian got word of this, he and his team wore white shirts, hollowed out blue books to carry their guns and badges that looked like a Book of Mormon, and carried their other police equipment in black packs. They even made little black name tags with Brother XXXX replaced with Detective XXXX on them, clearly advertising they were the police, but nobody really spoke English then. They made enough arrests in 3 months that the church flew whatever person is at the top of the group for missionaries to complain to the police department because nobody would let the missionaries in their homes thinking they were cops. Not one myself, but my ex was. So there were lots of stories shared at parties. Craziest one I heard was that one of them had a gum shoved in their mouth when they refused to sample the product. Department had a strict policy about it. Was able to stall long enough to get out of it. Barley. And yes, the cops outside were losing their shit listening to it unfold. Dude had been an UC for a long time and was a hell of a talker. The CI with him at the time also kept their cool, so that helped. If I remember right, SWAT hit the house the next day. It's been some years ago, so maybe it was a week or so later. But you get the point. Obviously there is more to it, but it's been 15 or so years since I've heard it, so bear with my memory. One time I had a Hollywood special effects guy to rig me up with a squib and radio control remote under my clothes. I was supposed to get shot in a bust, where the two connected individuals would be there to witness. The facade was completed a couple months later, where I got an outpatient procedure to recreate a scar that looked like a bullet wound. About a year after that, I was reinserted with so much cred, I made it all the way to upper management and helped bring the organization down.